Welcome to the Depth Dialogues podcast,
where we explore how depth psychology is applied to tackle contemporary social issues.
I'm Kirk Schneider.
And I'm Tyler Gamlin. Today's guest, Libby Traubman, embodies the pursuit of peace amidst conflict. She co-founded the Jewish-Palestinian Living Room Dialogue Group in 1992 with her late husband, Len. Their living room became a haven for dialogue between Jewish and Palestinian communities in San Mateo, California, fostering openness and understanding. From humble beginnings, the dialogue group has grown into a symbol of hope and reconciliation, demonstrating the power of face-to-face conversation to bridge divides. Libby's innovative approach to conflict resolution has garnered global recognition, inspiring educators, researchers, activists, and even governmental agencies like the U.S. Department of State. The Traubman's method of one-to-one, face-to-face dialogue has been embraced worldwide, offering solace to communities torn by violence and division. Their commitment to civil discourse has been highlighted in major media outlets, including CNN, NPR, MSNBC, and Voice of America. Join us as we explore Libby Traubman's remarkable journey and the enduring impact of the Jewish-Palestinian Living Room Dialogue Group. Through her unwavering dedication to dialogue and understanding, Libby reminds us that peace is always within reach. Now let's turn to Kirk to begin our conversation.
Thanks so much, Tyler. And Libby, it's great to reconnect with you. We go back a number of years and have spent some time working together, and I deeply cherish those moments that we had in working with each other and with a group. And I'd like to begin our meeting here with a background question, really. Can you share with our audience what motivated you and Len to begin these dialogues, and how did it go at the beginning, in the early stages?
First of all, thank you both for inviting me to do this. And honestly, when you read that, Tyler, it made me feel very emotional just to revisit all those years and all that's transpired, along the way, the highs, the lows, step-by-step learning on our part. Len as a children's dentist, and I had been a social worker, but all these opportunities that came to us weren't the things that we were necessarily trained to do. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of just step-by-step opportunity to say yes to certain things that came our way, and it's kind of hard to explain it. But Kirk, when you ask what got us going with this, it's hard to make it very brief, but just sort of in a nutshell, we got involved in the threat of nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union back in the 80s. And it was learning about the potential for war and the vision of having enemies that's put us on a track with a group of people where we started something called Beyond War, a new way of thinking. And the Beyond War movement kind of evolved into working not just with Soviets and Americans, because we went over there for 3 weeks and met the enemy and learned that an enemy is one whose story you have not heard. That quote didn't come out of that trip, but we heard it later and said that's what we experienced. And then the Beyond War movement ended up working with and helping Armenians and Azerbaijanis who were fighting over Nagorno-Karabakh. And I went to Baku and Yerevan for several weeks with a small team to bring people together. That was a learning. And then one thing led to another, where we were approached by two fathers, a Jewish father, an Israeli Jewish father, and a Palestinian father, whose sons were the same age, and they were very concerned about their boys becoming enemies at the checkpoint, so to speak. And what did they do about it? And they came to the Beyond War movement, which was here in California, and asked if we couldn't help bring citizen leaders from there to California because they couldn't really meet over there. So yes, we did that. We worked with Stanford Center on Conflict and Negotiation and the Beyond War movement, and we ended up bringing a wonderful group of citizen leaders to the Santa Cruz Mountains to a retreat where we experienced a whole week of face-to-face engaging in dialogue. And that was a new experience. You know, we didn't really know where it was going to lead, but we could see that having each one of those participants share his and her story about what they were experiencing, what their life is like in Israel, Palestine, was very important. And they ended up writing a document called Framework for a Public Peace Process that still has the elements today that could be applied. I mean, it's still the same way of thinking about dialogue and building trust and building relationships. Anyway, Len and I were part of that experience, and we ended up traveling back to Jerusalem with that team of people for a week, and we took that document and it was presented to the press, and I think it was given to the Knesset, and a lot of things came from it. And when we returned home, after having been involved in making all this happen and being part of it for several years, the big statement at the end was, these people said everybody should experience engaging in dialogue the way we have. And we encourage everybody, no matter where they live, to begin face-to-face relationship building activities. And so we said, oh my God, we've just been part of this amazing opportunity, this experience. We went to Jerusalem, we met these wonderful people. We can't just come home and let it fade. We have to do what they said and start our own dialogue, and that's what we did. And it took quite a while to find the participants who were willing to come together and sit face to face and be real with each other. And then, so that was the beginning. That's how it started. And there's a whole story behind how I ended up being able to find the Palestinians to participate, because I didn't know any who lived here. And another story about how it started. So if you want me to say more about that, because those were two learning experiences that we had.
Yeah, but I'm also curious, did you both have backgrounds in mediation, or did this come
No,
naturally? You had to
no.
kind of develop it yourself?
It was
Yeah.
learn as we went. Absolutely. I mean, as I said, Len had been a children's dentist, but he
Right.
also had been a ham radio operator.
Huh.
You know what ham radio is?
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
From the time he was 11, he was one of the youngest to become a ham radio operator. So he had experience communicating globally since he was a young kid. So that was sort of a inspiration for him. You know, he was a global thinker already. And I, as a social worker, I guess you could say I had training, so to speak, in listening, you know, understanding the power of listening. But it was nothing like the dialogue we ended up engaging in.
Right.
I'm curious what those conversations were like in the beginning as you were learning this process. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it was probably one of the most important things that we learned was when we first started the dialogue in our living room, and we did find after about 6 months the right group of people who were willing to come together, and they weren't going to quit because of their community saying, how could you? You know, they were people who dared to take that step, because it wasn't a popular thing back 32, 33 years ago people were sort of seen as traitors if they sat with the other. But anyway, we ended up finding some wonderful people who said yes. But in the beginning, what happened was in the circle in our living room, because we didn't really know what we were doing, it sort of started out where people said how they viewed history and who started it, and you did this, and crossing the green line, and you know, it was pointing fingers and a lot about blaming the other, and all of a sudden you realize, well, this wasn't going to last, because once a person said his piece or her piece, what else was there to say? You've heard what I have to say, and it was kind of out the door.
So it started like a debate. I'm sorry.
It's kind of like a debate and arguing and who had the truth and who saw it right.
Yeah.
And so we said, this isn't going to really help. This isn't the way it works. And so we invited everybody to come back. We said, we're sorry. We can see that, you know, everybody had good points to make, but that's not the purpose of this. The purpose of coming together is to getting to know each other. So are you willing to start over? So almost everybody came back, and we spent the next several months, literally meeting once a month, hearing each person's story in depth. And that's exactly what we did. And one by one, each person talked about his or her life, what it meant to be Jewish, what it meant to be Palestinian, what it meant to grow up in Israel or Palestine or the West Bank, what life was like, who were their grandparents, what did the land mean to them, what had they experienced. And it was through that personal story sharing that began to see each other as human and equal, and where it would be hard to pose somebody as an enemy and that I don't care about, and and it's okay with me if you're shot dead, when you know who they are, when you know that they're a parent or a child of, or what their life has been like, you know, what experiences did they have growing up, and they found that they had everything in common. You know, as human beings, we have so much in common about what we want in life, what is meaningful, what makes us happy, what is painful. And those are the human things that draw us together. And so anyway, after about 6 months of that deep personal sharing, even more than that, we began saying, okay, we've had this amazing opportunity. We've learned these things about each other. And as Len would say, if we sit in the living room and have the experience ourselves, but when we leave, we don't do anything with the experience, it's almost as if it didn't happen. So, okay, we're having this amazing experience, and we see that we really like each other, and there surely is a way forward. So what can we do? Okay, let's have some public events. So then that kind of put our feet to the fire. And I remember the first public event we had was at a senior center in the neighborhood, and we all said that we would invite our friends, and we had about 80 people who said that they were going to come. Wow. And I think it was the day before that it might have been the Temple on the Mount where Sharon, was that his name? Somebody shot a bunch of Palestinians.
Yeah.
Something bad happened the day before. We were having our public event with 80 people signed up. Wow. And everybody came together and said, oh, should we have it? There's going to be people are going to be mad. Maybe it'll be dangerous. And we said, no, that's the whole point. We are modeling something different. We're not going to let the news bring us down. And that was the first time we kind of took a stand and said, no, we're going to hold to what we're about. And we had our event. The senior center hired a policeman. They wanted to make sure that nothing would happen. I think the police maybe drove around to make sure nothing happened. And we had fabulous evening together. People in the dialogue shared his or her stories, and we sat at tables, and we had the people at the table share their stories and talk about what they heard. And that was kind of an early on for our purpose and what we were trying to demonstrate. And that event eventually led into many public experiences, including after about 3 years, we put on a dinner at a hotel restaurant near the airport where 420 Palestinians and Jews came. And Dennis Ross came as a speaker, and it was a big event, and that was a story in itself too.
He was he was ambassador to Israel.
Yeah, he was.
Dennis Ross.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, how did you handle fear, your own fear, and the fear of those who were meeting from these very different backgrounds and emotionality?
Yeah,
Did you have ground rules, or
we did. Yeah,
can you
of course.
describe that?
We had, in the beginning, we could see that to make our dialogue monthly meetings go well, we had to have agreements, and that we agreed to, from the simplest, like how long are we going to meet, how often are we going to meet, are we going to have food, where are we going to meet. We ended up meeting, rotating, going to each other's houses. We thought that was more personal. And then we agreed about how we're going to participate. How am I going to share, and how am I going to listen? And those things, then took on, we began to study it more, and there were whole sets of ideas. I think you know who Bohm is.
David Bohm?
Yeah, what's his first name?
Well, are you talking about the physicist?
Yes,
David Bohm, I think.
David Bohm. So he talked about the implicate and the explicit
Yes,
order,
yes.
and the hidden and the exposed, and then that whole concept of the iceberg and what's underneath it. All of that, started coming to our attention, and we started studying it, and then writing about it, and then how dialogue is different from conversation, discussion, and debate, especially debate, the differences. And then all of that became part of what we presented and how we talked. So these rules really guided us and helped us participate far better in the group. And also in the agreements, it was about, do you really want to be here? Are you here for the right reason? And if people came feeling like they came to get even or to blame somebody, in a short time, they could see that there was more to this than that. And every now and then there was somebody who just said, you, and we'd say, well, maybe this isn't for you, and they would choose on their own to leave. But that didn't happen very often. Most people got excited about the concept of being part of something that was so challenging and new.
So did you need to encourage people to make I statements instead of accusations, or to just stay with your perspective, your experience, rather than imposing your view on the other? You would.
Yeah, exactly. That was all part of all those instructions about how you speak and how you listen. It's not blaming, and expanding your frame of reference, and knowing there's always more, and holding things, how do you call it, in suspension, to let go of what's pushing you to say next. And we talked a lot about it's not easy. When you first come in, we don't expect people to be able to do that right away. It's really a training. For me, it's sort of like learning how to meditate or sticking to a diet or whatever. You have to be determined, you have to want to do it, you have to see the benefits of it,
Yes.
because it's not always easy to hold back what you want to say when you hear something that kind of is rubbing you the wrong way.
Absolutely.
It's a training.
So on that point, would you make a suggestion or intervene when people went off the rails, so to speak?
Well, we had a facilitator.
Okay.
So we always had a facilitator. When we first started, we had two people in the group, and one of a couple who had been part of Beyond War, and they wanted to be part of all this, even though they weren't Jewish or Palestinian, but they were part of our collective of friends who helped make all this happen. And the man was a lawyer. So the group gave him consent to be our facilitator.
Uh-huh.
You know, he wasn't either one. So so he was our facilitator for every meeting for at least 2 years. And then eventually he and his wife, they were part of Rotary and did a lot of other stuff. So eventually they kind of left the dialogue and went to do other things. But that was very important to have a facilitator, so that if somebody did get carried away, or if there was a lot of pain in a moment, you know, he was able to say, let's stop for a minute, let's just be still, let's just give this person space. Or if somebody was being kind of belligerent or blaming, he'd say, okay, let's stop, remember our agreements. Whatever he did as the facilitator, he knew how to do that. And it was very helpful, very helpful. And I think having a facilitator, at least in the early days, is important, because it's such a fiery subject.
Yeah.
Especially Jewish Palestinian stuff is so fiery. You really have to be able to have consent and help guide the group if you want to stay focused and useful and helpful.
Now you had written consent? You had
Written consent?
Yeah. Was it written or
No,
just verbal?
it was just all verbal.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, nothing was formal. We never did anything as formal as written consents or anything. It was just, yeah. And then as time went on, after Walt and Kay left, I kind of took over facilitation, because I'm not Jewish or Palestinian. I'm a supportive other. And so and so now to this day, because the dialogue is really back in motion again, big time. We've been meeting at my house Wednesday night. I expect more people than my living room can hold. And we are sort of starting with, this will be our third meeting with a lot of new people. We had the original small group, and now we have this expanding group that's coming, and there could be 35 or 40 people, and so they're going to have to crunch on the floor. And we're going to talk about agreements. We're going to talk about facilitation, you know, and if it could be that there will be a Jew and a Palestinian together who might co-facilitate. We're going to sort it out, because again, everybody who's coming feels that we are trying to offer an alternative to the anger that is being expressed, especially on some of the campuses and stuff.
Yeah, I want to just jump in, because I think this is a perfect time to transition to what's currently happening. And I'm curious, how have you seen this process develop over time, and specifically maybe the last year or so with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, and then obviously in the Gaza Strip today? Can you talk a little bit about how this process has changed at all, or what you see coming up?
Yeah, you know, I have to say this whole thing is really stressful for me, because not just Jewish Palestinian, which of course because of the dialogue and our involvement in this for many years is very stressful. But for me, the whole thing about war, trying to resolve our problems with violence and threats and power over, just, we know it doesn't work. And that was the point of the Beyond War movement, which kind of stopped because we didn't want to be just the Beyond War movement. We were more than that. This collective of people was not just about anti-war, it was about being the best humans you could be. It was about learning how to take care of the planet. We were very involved with other things about life in general. So, but clearly there needs to be Beyond War movements. And we know that we can see for ourselves that whatever people are trying to do to control somebody else just is not working. And it's devastating and it's painful to watch. And you just think about those children in Gaza. You think about all that destruction of life and places. It's heartbreaking. And you think about what it's doing to the Jewish community, you know, for and against, and you think about what there's actually, I heard on the news, there are people in our own government who are Putin supporters, which I don't begin to get. You know, so for me, it's raising the whole question about what is our role as human beings? You know, I feel like we must be either totally so selfish or so unconscious. We're not rising to what it means to be a fully functioning, totally loving human being. And the more there's the climate crisis and the more we're fighting over resources and the more the population is increasing, if we don't get it together, I hate to be a doomsdayer, but it looks pretty bleak to me. Well, that was a big shift, wasn't it?
Well,
You can tell me what you're feeling about all that. I
Well,
scared and think that we have a lot to do as people to change our way of thinking about what is meaningful and purposeful and helpful in life.
and it's important to talk about. Yeah, Kirk.
I was just going to say, I mean, I feel, and I think Tyler also shares the feeling of extreme resonance with what you're saying about doing everything we can to try to help people see each other more as human beings rather than labels or stereotypes or knee-jerk reactions that we have to each other, often because of transmitted traumas and current traumas. But I'm wondering, you know, we also have done quite a bit of work on this format I call the experiential democracy dialogue, which is a one-on-one approach to humanizing dialogues between people of very different cultural and political backgrounds. And I found it very powerful. It also has resonated with my work as a moderator for Braver Angels. I don't know if you've heard of that organization.
Bravery.
Braver Angels.
Oh, Braver Angels, absolutely, I have. Yes, yes. It has a very good reputation. A lot of people talk about Braver Angels. Absolutely.
Yes, they have been extremely important in my own development of the experiential democracy dialogue and in terms of feeling connection and a community that is attempting to move in these bridge building directions, you know, that you very much share. But I wonder, I certainly often enough have feelings, fortunately they're mainly passing, but they're still feelings of a little bit of futility sometimes about, you know, I think what we're doing is remarkable and really, really relevant and important. And that's the feedback I've gotten from a lot of people as well. And I'm sure you have. But, and even Braver Angels has like 12,000 members across the US and all 50 states. But is it really impacting places like Gaza and Israel, Ukraine and Russia? What is your feeling about the overall impact, the concrete impact of our work on the hot zone, so to speak, as well as more regional zones that we work in, but especially in terms of having the desired impact of really helping to shift the paradigm. I mean, I personally think we're in a race against time. We got to get this right quickly because of all the issues you mentioned: climate change, polarization, civil strife. So I wonder what your thoughts are about having impact, and is it happening? Can you give us hope?
Well, do you know the Enneagram? The study
Yes,
of
somewhat.
personality types? Okay, well, I'm a 6.
Okay.
So as a 6 is kind of like fearful. So I try to avoid falling into the fearful category of like, oh my God, what's the use? And, to thinking as long as we have a breath and as long as we're alive and as long as we're capable, it doesn't hurt to do something. And I don't really know. I can't read the tea leaves, but if I were to just judge based on my experience in my own life and what Len and I did with the dialogue, I would have to say that we have more power and more influence than we know. We just don't know. Because I have to tell you that over the years, a lot of people have come to me and said, oh, I know who you are. I've heard about your work. Oh, we started dialogue here because we saw your website or something. And I'd say, really? So the point is, we just don't know. And you don't know who either of you have had a conversation with yesterday or the day before where you said something that they will never forget.
That's a great
So
point.
that's sort of the assumption that I work under, is I don't want to overestimate any kind of sense of great power, but I don't want to underestimate that we influence and inspire each other.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to go to bed at night and not have insomnia or bad dreams, you try to hold on to the more positive potential. And so that's the only thing I can really say, because I can't, I just don't know where it's going to end up. I am part of another group called Elders Action Network, and we are a group that's 10 years old, and we are elders who feel like we have lived a life, we have experience, and we're also kind of not intentionally the cause of many of the problems we're having today because of a way of thinking. In the 40s and 50s, we created things like plastic that are now killing the planet. Or back in the 40s, when we created the nuclear bomb, they're now in many dangerous hands. So these are things that we did to better our own lives in the moment that had these long-term consequences. So now we're talking about what does it mean to be a good ancestor?
Beautiful.
And as elders, what do we bring to the table where we're taking responsibility and not just passing the buck to the younger people and saying, it's too bad, now it's in your hands. So I think if we elders, because we're a huge percentage of the population today and we're living longer than ever, if we can hang in there and be supportive and be thoughtful and be loving and be encouraging, that can be helpful too.
That's a wonderful message to the elders among us, as well as to the young folks who are searching for meaning too, which I think is a really integral part of what we're attempting to cultivate, right? I mean, help people find, what is the best life to live? I mean,
Yeah.
this is sort of what Socrates was pursuing too.
Yeah.
It's a bit of an offshoot of that, of
Yeah.
engaging in substantive inquiry to find out how are you living and how are you really willing to live.
It also
And
makes me think
that's my
about,
therapy, I have to say.
yeah, that the center of EI. It also makes me think about emotionally restorative relationships that we've talked about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Say more. Or
Well, I was curious about Libby's interpretation of that because it felt like she was really touching on that.
let
And
me just define what we mean by
yeah.
emotionally restorative
Mhm.
relationships. Uh, we and I really see that as a critical element to addressing the underlying problems that we have today in so many quarters, where we have so much destructiveness and destructive anxiety precisely because we're not helping people develop the tools to work with their own anxieties earlier on. And by emotionally restorative relationships, we're talking about this country putting a premium on helping people to feel seen and heard
Yeah.
and getting at the root of their problems. You were talking about the implicate order. I mean, so getting to the deeper issues so that we're not just rearranging chairs on the Titanic, so to
Yeah.
speak, but getting to
Yeah.
the deeper issues. So
Yes.
wondering what your feeling is about emotionally restorative relationships, or the need generally for people to engage with each other in these deeper ways.
Yeah. And I thought about that a lot when Libby was talking about the process of how these dialogues came to be. One thing that really stuck out to me was the the variable of going into someone else's home and the implications of that, because that
Yeah.
is kind of an olive branch and saying, I may have some issues of our backgrounds, but come into my home and let's have a conversation. That's saying a lot
Yes.
without saying it, right? And I think that that's laying this groundwork for being able to have a more restorative relationship, because that's not something you do with somebody that you don't want to engage with. You don't, invite them into your home.
It's very
That's
intimate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. And going into someone else's home, if you really have very strong feelings against somebody and you're not willing to hear their perspective, you're probably not going to go to their home either. And so that
Not
seemed
only
to,
that, there's a
yeah,
fear in it.
yeah. So I think that that's, this implicit way of saying, okay, I'm willing to show up here. There's a few things that stood out to me when you were talking about the development of these dialogues, and you said you didn't really know what you guys were doing at the time. But there's a few things that I think that were so powerful that just happened from I think your instinct, yours and Len's, creating space, having a common goal in mind. Let's learn about each other.
Hmm.
The curiosity that's driving that, and then the humility, like, oh wait, we messed up, come, let's try this again, let's come back. So you're not going in with this agenda of, let me tell you how to make things work, but it was just, well, let's just get together, let's just kind of see what comes up, and then we can address what's in the room. But it's going to be hard to have people show up and have a seat at the table if you're directing them where they're going to sit first, right? So those things stood out to me, and I think that those are laying the groundwork for the environment to be conducive to a relationship that's going to be restorative.
And I would just add one other thing. It's not just about where you're going to sit at the table, but are you invited to sit at the
Mm-hmm.
table?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of work goes on where the wrong people are at the table, and the people who need the help and the new thinking are not included. And often it's kind of the leaders of the community, the rich, the powerful, the landowners, who are making the decisions for the guy who's homeless, or the people who are on food stamps or whatever. They're not at the table.
Mhm.
And, you know, if you don't know their story, and if they're not included in what they need, and if you don't see them as human and equal, you tend not to make all the best decisions that include them. I would just say that as, and the other thing, in something you said about implicate, explicate order, I also think that the United States of America is terrible at looking at our shadow side.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, I feel like
Yeah.
probably a lot of problems today stem from the fact that we are holding on to being the most powerful, influential country in the world. And what would it mean if we became second or third, or lost that seat of power? But
Yeah.
we are hanging on for dear life. That's my opinion. And I feel like it's not helping to feel, it's not helping to not look at our shadow side, and it's not helping to see that by making these decisions to hold on to power, that's what keeps us building weapons. That's what keeps us making our net profit in the United States of America based on military weapons, where we could be using just some tiny part of that money on better housing and helping with the environmental situation and easing people out of the coal mines. And, you know, anyway, I just feel like we're not looking at the true symptoms, and we are hanging on to what it means to be powerful as a nation and also as human beings, and lording over our nature.
I echo that very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
That our culture and cultures like ours, and even cultures not like ours, unfortunately, power centers throughout the world, tend not to be very good about working with inner lives. We're really sharp with the externals, right? With what we can measure, the explicate order, right? That which we can readily control, kind of the quick fix, instant result way of seeing things. But we really need to get moving in terms of helping people develop skills to be much more supportive and understanding of each other, and abilities to work with differences and with the unknown. And I think that's a lot of the benefit of the kind of work we're doing too, is we're helping people to, at least at some level, develop those skills.
So how do you two imagine being able to move those skills into a much wider circle? Like how do you do that?
Yeah.
Well,
I was going to ask
a
you.
huge order. I mean, okay, I ran for president of APA. I was a candidate a few times, with maybe a little bit of a quixotic vision, but it was basically to call for a national core of, you could say, a national core of depth healers, which relates to our YouTube channel, or a national core of mental health providers who will focus on making emotionally restorative relationships much more accessible and affordable throughout the country. And by emotionally restorative relationships, I don't only mean making, let's say, in-depth relational psychotherapy much more available, especially in underserved areas, but mentoring, life coaching, school counseling for youth, prison counseling. I mean, there's so many needs for these emotionally restorative relationships in hospitals, medical settings. So that's kind of my broad vision, is a national core of depth healers.
Yes, that's certainly a huge need. I agree.
But how do we do it?
You know, recently I went to see my son who lives in Cardiff, and he took me to meet this group of individuals who are starting a thing called Portal. And their whole goal is they're starting with men because they feel that men need it the most, and that a lot of men are not given the space to be heard, to be understood, to share their feelings, to, especially today with so much stress, business in the business world. You know, many of the men are struggling hard to put food on the table. The cost of living has gone up when it comes to, I mean, I don't want to belittle about life being better in America necessarily, but I think when it comes to groceries and things like that and gas, people are paying more and they're feeling it. So I went to visit with them and I heard about their program, and they eventually want to be able to open the doors to help women as well. But they feel like the big first push is for men, to help them be able to sustain their lives and to be heard, and to just, if you can feel you can get up in the morning without wishing you were dead, is a big step in the right direction. So I agree with you. If there could be more thoughtful groups like that that are centered in a community, because we know that we haven't given mental health. I guess there's a difference between mental health and mental illness. So mental health is like the day-to-day, and illness needs a different form of support and maybe medication. But there are a lot of people who have just stress issues and job issues, and they need support by their community, and they need to feel included and heard. And yeah, so I agree with you. If more ways of thinking like that could be put into each community, where men and ultimately women could be invited to, and not have to pay $500 every time they walk through the door. So the costs on our mental health issues is so great that if we can provide services that are affordable or even free, I think it would do great things to solve many of those problems.
I agree, and that's where we need funding too. We need, I would say big government funding and big private donorship or something like that.
Take those billions that it takes to build one new B-1 bomber or a new submarine and put it into those
There you go.
agencies to help stress, and you'll have a lot of problems solved.
Right on.
Libby, I'm wondering if you can comment on what's going on recently with these college campus protests, and how you feel that is playing into a benefit or maybe stalling the dialogue with what's going on in the Gaza Strip.
Well, I would just, I'm not an expert on it, but the things that I would say is that I understand why the students are rebelling and upset, because clearly what's happening in Gaza goes beyond what is needed to end this situation. When you think about the seeds it's planting for future, for all these kids who are maimed and even orphaned now, it doesn't bode well for the future. And the pain and suffering of the Israelis, all these psychological moments are going to have long-lasting scars.
Yeah.
But I think two things that happen on the college campus. Number one, I've heard in the news that there are several where they had dialogue going on, bringing students together, talking about their feelings, where these demonstrations have not occurred. where they've been able to manage and sustain life on the campus. So that's, to me, that is very encouraging and important to know, but it's more rare. But I also think that a lot of the students today, and this is just my understanding, are not necessarily Jewish or Palestinian. They are quite often just students who are living in the moment, which is they see things going on in the world that they're very unhappy about. And it's all the wars, it's all the alienation, it's all the Black Lives Matter, it's all the LGBTQ, all of those things together are upsetting our young people. And it's kind of like, what is the world we're living in? We're so angry, we're so judgmental, we're so alienated from the other. And so they are just fighting for a cause. I think they're kind of just fighting to be human and to have a meaningful life. That's a big group of them, because I'll bet you there's a certain percentage on those campuses that don't know a full story about what it means to be Jewish or even the Holocaust. And I'm sure there's a whole group of people who don't know the full story about the Palestinians, and they don't know the full story about how Israel was founded, and it wasn't the fault of the Jews or the Palestinians. They were sort of thrown together from the outside. I mean, there's a whole history there that makes a difference if you understand it and how you view what's happening today.
Yeah.
And that's not understood. It's just a in the moment response to all the negative that's happening. And I get that. I get their frustration. They are demonstrating what the three of us have just talked about. They're concerned for the future, what's going to happen 10 years from now. Will I be able to have children? They're worried about all those things, and they're just playing it out today. And I know they say it kind of flashes back to the demonstrations against the war in Vietnam. This is kind of their war in Vietnam situation. So that's sort of what I see is happening on the college campuses. I also see that there are Jews who are taking a stand for fighting about getting out of Gaza. So it's not this side is totally this way and this side is totally this way. I see more that the students are fighting for a bigger justice, and they're fighting for the ceasefire and peace, whatever it takes to make that happen. And if you don't know how to sit down and talk about it, then it's far easier to blame and point fingers.
Yeah.
It's just sharing their frustration and their fear.
Yeah. So
That's how
that points up the relevance, I believe, of groups like yours to the college campuses too. Can we promote more of these sort of supportive, structured dialogues on the college campuses?
And that's what we actually went to a college campus, and they just said, we're not ready. That was at UC Berkeley. But what we're trying to do now is a dialogue group. And like I said, it's grown from like 12 or 15 people to, I have 40 name tags on my dining room table for this Wednesday night. And I'm terrified if they all show up. I don't know where they're going to sit. But the goal of what we're trying to do as a newly growing, expanding Jewish-Palestinian dialogue group is model that we are working for something that works for both peoples equally now and in the future. And it starts with building relationships and building trust.
Yeah.
And we do that by sharing our stories one by one in the living room. And what we're trying to do is, after the different people practice sharing their story and telling the high points and what they really feel is important to know, we are going out to other groups who have been inviting us to come in and we provide a panel of either one of each or two of each, and they share their personal story. And then we engage the audience in questions and maybe even have them turn to each other and take some minutes to share their personal stories. But the goal is to help people see there's a better way. It's more about compassionate listening and engaging the other to get more information, to clarify rather than to judge and correct,
Yeah.
all the basic rules of dialogue. And we put that out as part of the program so that people can see that there's a better approach to working through these things. So that's our goal right now. That's what we're trying to do.
I think that's great. And of course, our hope is that that will spread and be contagious. And the people who have been part of your groups, our groups, will go out and carry on the facilitation because we can only do so much. Right? So
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
really important. I know we're somewhat coming to the hour here. I'm wondering if you had another particular question, Tyler, at this point, or if we can ask Libby to tell us where people can find,
Yeah.
illustrations of your work. I know in my book, Depolarizing of America, I cover a whole section on your work, but you also have a website. But I wanted to give you, Tyler, a chance to ask something more if there was something you felt was
Yeah.
important first.
Yeah, thank you, Kirk. The only follow-up I would have is just, how can listeners walk away from this? Can you provide something that listeners can walk away with, and, speaking to how your work can maybe inspire others to take action in their own communities, given, we've discussed so much of what is happening, and there's so much beautiful work that you've done. It's been, you know, quite successful over the years, and very long-standing. What would you like to leave for the listener, and how they can take that into their community or their work?
I think probably one of the most important things that I can share that has driven me for a long time, many, many years, even before I got involved with Jewish-Palestinian living room dialogue, was the concept that all of life is interrelated, interdependent, and interconnected, and all is one. And on our cars, our license plates have always said "be as one" or "we are one." And it wasn't until I really understood that, and I'm 83, and I learned that when I was first married, and saw that in 69, I think it was, the Earth from space. And Len and I realized that we all live on the same amazing, beautiful planet, and that we're all equally dependent on it for our very survival. So everything that he and I ever did, and I continue to do, is inspired by that image and that knowledge that we are all one. And that it's hard to understand sometimes when we live thousands and thousands of miles apart, but that we breathe the same air, and ultimately we have the same water resource that kind of goes through the air and is recycled and shows up in different places, but it's the same water. We're dependent on the same earth, the same living system. And we are right now pretty disconnected from that living system, and we are surely disconnected from each other. And so I just would encourage people to revisit the idea that we're all in it together.
Mm-hmm.
Together we're better. I need you, you need me. And if we can learn how to love in every situation, meaning do the right thing for life, That's what I would tell people. And it goes beyond Jewish, Palestinian, or Russian and America. It's like the big picture all over the planet. We really need to understand our interconnectedness, our interrelatedness, our interdependence. If we don't make it together, we're not going to make it.
What a beautiful message to end on. Libby, I want to thank you again for your time here. And this has been such a wonderful conversation, difficult topics at times, but as we mentioned, very important to touch on. And I'm so happy that you are involved in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me and having me. And I hope we stay connected because we're walking the same path. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Let's find ways of continuing to collaborate. And do you want to leave listeners with your website where they can go to find out more examples of your work?
I think if they want to look at the website, they can Google Jewish Palestinian Living Room Dialogue and the name Traubman, Traubman.
And
some
I
form
will,
of that should come up.
and I'll link all of that in the details here in the show notes. Okay.
And again, anybody who wants to look at that website, everything is for use. It's all downloadable. You don't pay for anything or anything. It's whatever is useful.
All right. Thank you so much, Libby.
Thank you both. It was wonderful to meet you.